Pension Board. We're just starting off with an annual reminder of the constitution and membership in terms of reference of this board. Sean, you'll very quickly. Oh, Mike, so Mike, you'll quickly introduce that.
Yeah, just bear with me a second, Judge, shall we? Magic of the internet.
Okay, sorry, slight pause. We're just waiting while the live stream comes up. Please grab a seat.
Right, sorry, Chair. Yeah, so item one, it's just the usual item that we would have at the July meetings, just setting out the current constitution and membership of the board, and also attaching the current terms of reference, a copy of which will go in the minute book for as a permanent record.
Does anybody wish to make any? We actually asked simply to note this. If anybody got anything burning they wish to say, please do. No? Yeah, sorry, Deborah.
I'll read the section on the process of recruitment.
Deborah, please just speak up both for me and for the machine.
Sorry, but on the section in relation to recruitment,
yeah,
it doesn't say that an interview is actually necessary. It's only you know, if it was necessary. We consider actually interviewing even if there was only one.
Yeah, and in the planning that we've done, we've allowed for interviews to take place, and we thought it would be good to actually meet the candidates before we you know, made a judgment or a decision on it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Apart from that, are we happy to note the current terms?
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you. Item 2 is just to go through the recruitment process for the next over the next 12 months, because as we're all aware, there's quite a lot of change happening. 4 members will retire, and I shall also retire over the next kind of 12 months or so. So, Sean, if you could just give a quick overview, perhaps, of what's happening.
Yeah, sure. And Mukhtar, you're actually going to lead us through this, just to confirm a few things.
I can do obviously pitching if you want to.
Yeah.
Well, as you said, Willie, we've got quite a bit of turnover of board members over the next year. I know because the board came into existence in 2015 with an 8-year term, and we're now into the 8th year now. So many of the members are coming to an end of their term. The paper you have in front of you sets out the intentions for the chair and the 4 members of the board who are coming to an end. We have decided for the chair, the proposal is that we would extend the end of the chair's contract by 7 months from the 1st of April 2023 to the 31st of October 2023. There's a number of reasons set out, and you see that in the report itself, which are beneficial to the board and ensuring that we have a good transition to the new members. And then we've also set out the 4 members whose terms are coming to an end. There's a slight difference with Steve, because Steve's finishing before the end of, we have a handover, so that's the only one that's slightly anomalous. This is probably the way things have worked out.
First one to be appointed.
Yeah, so yes, that's right. So the others would come along, and the replacements would be observers at the first meeting. And you can see in appendix A the time frames that are involved for each of for the chair and also the 4 members of the board, and the various actions that would have to happen in relation to the recruitment of each one.
Okay, and before we, you're asked to comment this. Before we start doing that, first of all, Carl, can you hear us clearly?
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Okay, fantastic. Secondly, I have to declare an interest because if my contract is extended for 7 months, I'm going to get a small amount more money. So I wish to declare that interest. And thirdly, you know, because if you wish me to leave the room for this, I think, you know, you should say so, because again, I have a slight interest in it. But I think the whole point of this item is simply to kind of just note and comment on the process which has been set out. But I offer to leave the room if you wish me to.
I was going to say thank you for being willing to do anything for 7 months.
Right, thank you.
It's unusual because normally people are let off early for good behaviour.
My only comment on looking at this was that I was surprised that the advertising of the position for the board members was August to early September, and I just wondered in view of people's tendency to not perhaps be focused on work so much during August, but that could be July to early September.
We can look
But it's
into
some
that.
time ahead.
I think the key driver really was that we wanted to get the advertising out so that we could do the recruitment process and interviews and things like that in the autumn. And then we
You
need
could
to get
still interview in
approval.
the autumn, but I was just thinking to advertise the position perhaps a little earlier.
Yeah, we can take that away and look into that. We're in the
Okay.
process of drafting up the
Okay.
details, so that might work better.
Catherine, one of the kind of issues is that all the appointments have to go through full council, which
Yes.
adds another kind of complication to the and time to the whole process.
Yes, I understand.
So Eddie, do you want to?
No, I think that's a sound. So bring it forward. Obviously, it's holiday.
Deborah, you wanted to say that?
Firstly, to echo Catherine's thanks to you, William, for sticking with us. And on the key drivers, it just mentioned that the appointments will be staggered, which seems a really good idea. Will the first one be 2 years, 4 years, and then another 2 years? Or would those individuals?
Do you want me to pick that? I mean, essentially, there's 4 posts that we're looking at. So we thought one option that we're looking at is to have 2 of them for a duration of 4 years, and then 2 of them for 2 + 2 years. So we'll avoid this high turnover rate in a short period of time in the future when we hit a 8-year
Great, so
threshold.
it will be 2, 4, 2, so you can get the full 8. And the other query was on the board members and recruitment, probably will come from communication later in terms of how will members be alerted, specifically the retired members, of the opportunity.
I think it's appropriate to take that.
Yeah. So we've obviously got our fund website, so we'll look to use that as best we can for recruitment. And one other option is that we could link into Llpb, who have the contact details of members essentially. You know, for instance, we could perhaps email or put a message up that they would have access to. So we're working through that detail at the moment.
We're going to try and hit the newsletters
I was
as
going to
well.
say. the
Yeah.
newsletter.
So look,
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, I'm just going to add, William, that we're going to try and hit the newsletters for the various pensioner types as well, as many as we can, leading up to the recruitment.
The newsletter seems an absolutely ideal way
Yeah.
of communicating that, providing that people know that the newsletter is there.
Mm.
Yeah.
So we can make that a way.
I mean, last time we recruited, I think we had almost 30 applications for one place. So I am hopeful we will be able to get some good applications. Then
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm still learning the governance, so forgive me if it's a silly
Yeah.
question, but I'm not sure who agreed the extension of the independent chair's contract, but I completely support it. And
Fair question.
But I don't know who agreed it.
So that would be me under the scheme of delegations.
All right.
So
Fair play, well done.
we
Yeah.
we check out the governance
Good
side of
result.
it.
Yeah.
any other comments on the process as written? No, I'm just going to make note one point is that under the training item, we just need to touch on the induction training for the people we appoint, because that's really important to get that right. Okay, so we're happy to have commented on that. In which case I'll move on to item 3, which unusually is apologies. I've had apologies from Yvonne, but everybody else is present either here or on screen. I just wish to quickly introduce Jenny Harrison, who is a new-ish member of the team working with Julie Price. So she's one who you don't recognise her. I'm not going to get around the board, I'm afraid. You'll work out who we are over time. Okay, item 4. Does anybody wish to disclose any other pecuniary or non-pecuniary interests? No? Okay, super. Right, item 5 is the minutes of the last meeting. I'm sure I'll turn to you to introduce that.
Okay, so some of the key points to pick up on, we agreed to issue the revised new joiner letter that Llpb produced, so that's been shared with the board members. If there's any comments or questions, please feel free to let us know. There's the induction training for new board members under agenda item 4, so that's on page 20. Mike, did you want to comment on this?
Only to say, obviously, once we've progressed through the recruitment process, there are some new members on the pension fund committee, and we are in the process of arranging an induction session for them, which will be done online. So it's just really to flag up. We will probably pursue a similar thing for the new pension board members, so that they can, we can get them sort of up to speed ahead of any meetings that they attend. We are also in the process of producing a pack for board members with some information in that again could be given to them just to help them ease them into the into the meetings and what's what.
And then just moving through the rest of the minutes on page 21 under agenda item 6, and there was a resolution around the annual report of the local pension board, and that report went through to the pension fund committee and was agreed at the meeting in June. So it will make its way into the annual report that we produce, which will be in the early autumn. And then just moving on to page 22. At the top of page 22, there was a reference there to LPPA and the disclosure of ABC values. And so there had been a mistake that was made and noted in the breaches report last time at the meeting. It was just to update you that we've had assurance it was an isolated manual mistake. And so there's no big problem that we need to deal with in this. It's quite a focused problem. And then just looking through the rest of the minutes, on page 24, there's reference to, at the top of the page, there's reference to the communication strategy. So we're going to cover that off in agenda item 9. Agenda item 15 on page 24 referred to the risk management framework. You'll have seen that at the last meeting of the board, and it went through to the committee in June and was approved. And then finally, there were a couple of actions on the bottom part of page 24 around the risk register, which we'll cover off in agenda item 17.
Good, thank you very much. So let me open it. We obviously have to approve these minutes. Let me open it up for comments or questions. Is everybody happy?
Just needs correction of the date on page 21, 17th of June 2022, not 2021.
Okay.
Okay, well spotted. That was subject to that amendment. Are we happy? Okay, Steve, I will sign them and approve them. Right, item 6 is the breaches report, which I think, Junaid, you're going to introduce us, aren't you? Yeah.
So
And I'll then just turn to Steve after that.
I'll keep it quite brief. We don't have the full quotas data, so the incidence is only recorded for 2 months. However, we have recorded 26 incidents in that period, which have been dealt with in line with the escalation procedures. At the last board meeting, it was mentioned that the quarter 4 incidents just run quite low, so they've been updated since, and the figures are more in line with what we normally expect. Just moving on to the data breaches, so there's 4 data breaches recorded in the period from LPPA. They haven't been deemed to be significant enough to warrant reporting to the Information Commissioner. And the code of practice 14 breaches in the period is 2 recorded, 1 in April and 1 in May.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to turn to Steve simply because I put your name by this particular item. So any kind of comments or questions you want to?
So I have a couple of questions. One related to the data breaches and the online access from the ex-husband and themselves. Just wondering if there are issues around access to the systems.
So we did contact LPPA regarding this, and they did respond. It was the members' online access was set up using the email address which the member shared with her ex-husband and hadn't updated it. Was concerned that there was an ex-husband would access that account. LPPA did look into it and identified there was no unauthorized access on that account. So it was more of a member concern rather than somebody else actually accessing that account. LPPA supported that member resolving the issues around
It
that.
sounds the member sharing the password.
Yeah, so the member, yeah, as they were married, well, they were still married when they set that account up.
So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the other question was, like, how did you find out about the pre-1998 Llpbs? Not provided the time options. You know, 24 years after the event, at least.
So they're not, they weren't supposed to be processed in 1999, depending on when they left. They were supposed to receive their benefits at age 60. So they were deferred, and then when they reached 60, so there was a number of them missed, and they identified them and processed them. I'm not exactly sure when these members reached 60, but it won't have been 1998, it will be quite recent times.
Was that discovered by chance or?
I'm not 100% sure, but
I think there was a particular case that identified this, and then it emerged that to identify these members, essentially you need to look at a couple of reports. It wasn't as automated as we'd want in an ideal world. And so we flagged it to LPPA and they've rectified that. And they will periodically undertake these manual workarounds, with hopefully a view to having something a bit more automated in UPM. However, it is a small cohort of members that we'll be talking about.
Glyn, you wanted to?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's just a governance question, I'm afraid again. Who decides if the breaches are significant enough to report to the ICO, or do you have a framework you operate with?
Well, we do have a breaches policy which we're currently reviewing, and if we told we do need to kind of brush up on exactly where things are going at the moment, since our PA have become separate from the authority.
Yeah.
Those processes are maybe a slightly give up the review of the breaches policy at the second half to do that.
Okay, so
Because at the moment, a breach will happen and we'll be told at the end of the month that's not good enough. It should be coming probably before that. We should be making that determination. At the moment, it's not happening. So there is a bit of reliance on them doing it.
yeah,
But that's
never
probably-
like people marking their homework.
That's it, yeah.
So that new policy will go where from?
So that will come here. So we're working on that at the moment, and it will come to the next or the following meeting of the board.
It will come up because it ought to be reviewed every 3 years or so.
Yeah.
And it is time it was, and it will come up within the next meeting or two. Part of the reason why we look at this every single meeting is that it's not LPPA marking their own homework. But yeah, but a completely fair question, and carry on asking them.
Okay.
Any other? Yes, Deborah.
Yeah, and on the data breaches and the members' details have been changed online, does that link to the previous breach, or is that a different? Is that completely separate one?
think this is a separate one that occurred last month. At Llpb, I've looked into that one as well. Identified the member had some personal issues on their own email account being hacked and similar issues with other online accounts. So Llpb has been supporting that member and monitoring that account.
Super, thank you. And on the administration breaches, again, down to this one about the pre-1998 leavers, is the fund potentially then subject to a claim for damages from any of those people?
When we've looked at it, the answer to that was no, essentially. I think because most of the individuals haven't reached that age of 60, or if they had, it was fairly recently, and they'd get some kind of interest or addition to reflect the late payment of the benefits. So we were fairly reassured that that wouldn't expose us to any risk.
Any other questions or comments about the breaches? Okay, are we happy to note the breaches as presented? Thank you very much. Item 7 is a regulatory update. Jenny, you're going to do this, aren't you?
Yeah, on behalf of Jill, she's off at the moment. So there's not an awful lot really to update on, or nothing significant particularly, but Prudential have written to the head of pensions at LGA, Joe Donnelly, just to provide a bit of update information on the performance issues that we've all been experiencing since November 20. So the letter basically lays out, you know, the reasons why we've experienced these issues, which was a new system being implemented, steps that are being taken and have already been taken up to now to resolve the issue, and expected timescales for normal services to be resumed. So mostly the letter seems to indicate an improvement overall, but we are, as the fund, we're keeping a close eye. We are still working with LPPA, and Julie has also been liaising with the Prudential client manager quite closely. We both now have access to the Prudential online portal. Well, Julie does, mine's on its way. So we will be able to do some spot checks and just keep an eye and make sure everything is in order, basically. So the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities, or DLUC, have recently released some statutory guidance and special severance payments. So for the most part, this isn't really a massive impact on us as a fund. It's more of an employer guidance that they really need to be aware of. But it is worth noting, with what's been going on in general with exit payments, and the government has an agenda on reducing them in general. But it does lay out in terms of strain costs, which benefit payments would maybe constitute a special severance payment and which ones will not. Single code of practice, there wasn't really much of an update at all here. Everything seems to be still on track to go ahead in terms of being laid before Parliament and then coming into force in October. I believe there's another report on this later, so I'll pick that one up. So the pensions regulator have recently consulted on a new draft enforcement policy and a new updated prosecution policy. So the consultation period ran from the 4th of May up to the 24th of June. So LPPA have provided a response to this. So the enforcement policy is looking to consolidate a few existing policies into one new document. And the draft prosecution policies is basically going to explain how the TPR will approach prosecution of workplace pension criminal offences or offences that are otherwise in relation to TPR functions. So these policies really are reflecting the new powers that have been granted in the recent Pension Scheme Act 2021. So the stronger nudge regulations, these have now come into force from the 1st of June. So these regulations are really just to ensure that individuals are made aware of guidance and encouraged to take it when either receiving or transferring the defined contribution pension savings. So for LPPA, they have incorporated some sample documents that have been produced by the LGA, and they've updated their processes for ABCs of retirement and transfers of ABCs for any members aged 50 or over, just to ensure that they're complying with the regulations. And then finally, there was 2 publications recently released by the Pension Administration Standards Association, or PASA. So the first one is the Good Practice Guidance So this is basically relating to the recent transfer regulations, and it just really puts all of the new, like the red and amber flags, into a new guidance, and it sets up quite comprehensive processing and the guiding principles, of which really member experience at the forefront and making it as quick and streamlined as possible. And we've had confirmation that LPPA are reviewing those processes, and they've implemented them in compliance with the guidance basically going forward. And then finally, there has been a cybercrime checklist that's also been published recently, which follows on from previous cybercrime guidance that was published back in November 2020. So this checklist is focusing on 4 protection measures for administrators to satisfy, which are meet legal and regulatory standards, understanding the organisation's vulnerability to cybercrime, ensuring the organisation is resilient to cybercrime, and remain able to fulfil key functions. So LPPA have also confirmed that they are reviewing the checklist, and we as a fund are also reviewing cybersecurity in conjunction with the new single code of practice. So that might be touched on as well, possibly. That's from me.
Good, thank you very much. You'll find Colin's shoes sitting underneath your chair. Any kind of comments, questions? I've got one comment I want to make. Catherine.
Just a comment on number 6 about defined benefit transfers. Does that apply only to transfers out, or does it also apply to transfers in?
From our point of view, I think it was transfers out.
Yeah,
To the ABC, yeah.
Okay.
And because the risk there is that you'd lose that defined benefit value by moving out.
Yeah,
And
we
that's what
covered
we're
from
trying to
the
focus on.
receiving scheme at their end, wouldn't it? Assume, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I was just going to say that with my LPFA hat on, I actually had training from LPPA on this subject, because it is something which the pension regulators are looking really carefully at. And it was either they have got some quite detailed work which they're doing. It might be a good idea to get training from them for the committee and board up in Lancashire here as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lynn.
Could I ask if we did appoint a named individual with accountability for cybersecurity? Or is that still outstanding? Did we appoint a named individual for responsibility for cybersecurity? That was point number 1 on the checklist.
We are going through all
Going through
the
it.
elements of the service. We've got a workshop in a few weeks as well.
Okay.
We will have.
That'd be one of the products of that workshop.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, and I think that also
Next time.
LPPI will have a named individual who's responsible, so that's really important as well.
Thank you. Any other questions about the regulatory update? Are we happy to note it? Yep. Okay. Right, item 8, the single code of practice. And as we just heard, this is coming into force, so this gap analysis is pretty important. Sinead, you're leading on this, aren't you? Yeah.
So, as you're aware, the pensions regulators published a draft new single code of practice in March 2021, which will supersede the code of practice 14, and we're expecting it to be published later this year. We've reviewed the requirements from the single code of practice, and we've identified areas which we feel will require attention once the final document is provided from the pensions regulator. In the draft code of practice, there's 51 modules, and we've identified 38 of the modules being applicable to the local government pension scheme. Although once a final version is provided, we will review them 38 modules to double check that they still apply to the local government pension scheme. As there are a couple of them that potentially may not apply, but at the moment we're treating them as they are applicable. It's important to note that the transition from these code of practice 14 to the single code of practice is an evolution and not a revolution. So the gap analysis that we've undertaken with the actions within that document will be updated as we develop our transition to the single code of practice. One of the biggest areas that we've identified is the cyber controls, and Appendix 8 outlines the actions that we're working towards on this module, which we've already mentioned that there's a cybersecurity workshop planned later this month, which will hopefully provide more context around requirements.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn to Catherine and to Kevin to lead the discussion.
My suspicion when I heard about this coming in, it seems to have been justified that trying to make a one-size-fits-all possible schemes, including private pensions, seems to be a very difficult task. And I'm surprised at the number and the extent of the gaps that have been identified. But well done for identifying more. And presumably this is, as you said, is an evolutionary process. So hopefully the new single code of practice will evolve in a good way.
Just to clarify, the modules that we've identified that are applicable to the local government pension scheme, that 38, they don't all have gaps in them, but there's still a number of areas.
Kevin, do you want to add anything?
Well, yeah, just to echo what Catherine said. I mean, thanks to the officers for a comprehensive job, because it's very important given the streamlining effort, which is a good idea, although there is a caveat, as you said. The two things that stood out for me was one was, again, cybersecurity, you already mentioned it, and the other one, member communications, because there's still work to do on that. There was quite a funny one at the very start, trying to find the definition of a governing body.
Yeah.
On that, at the PLSA conference a couple of weeks ago, Theresa Clay, who's the senior civil servant at DLUC, Leeds United Hull City, remember it. DLUC, she spoke and she made it very clear that they were going to treat the S101 committee, i.e. the pension fund committee, as a governing body. And our role here is simply to assist.
Well, that was the right answer. Choose the decision-making body.
Yeah.
I mean, and also, it's good to see that in terms of a lot, but pretty well all of the existing issues, I mentioned a couple of exceptions, we tick the boxes. You know, we're on top of it, and that's really important. And the good thing too, that it's mentioned somewhere, that even though not necessarily everything need apply to local government schemes, the principles of those other ones are still good principles for us to follow as well. Yes. So, I mean, it's good. I'll report on this when it comes to later out of the conference I was at.
Okay.
I think steady as she goes.
Carl, I'm aware that have you got any questions, Carl? You're on mute, I'm afraid.
I was interested in the point you just made there about a colleague at a recent event you attended saying that the pension fund committee had ultimate responsibility for the governance and ours was an advisory role, because that's actually quite inconsistent with some of the feedback I've had in the past when attending training sessions. But nevertheless, there is a control there around assurance of governance and internal controls. And we've got a comment of internal audit provide assurance annually around fund governance and management. Llpb also undertake their internal audit with ad hoc oversight from an external auditor, highlighted in yellow. I'm just wondering, is that highlighted in yellow because the belief is that that isn't sufficient for us to be able to gain the level of assurance we need that the governance arrangements we have in place are effective?
I'm going to turn to Laura, I think, if I may, to respond initially.
Yeah, I was a bit surprised at the idea that you wouldn't be able to identify the governance body, because it's usually relatively clear when you look at an organisation where the power to make decisions sit. The pension fund committee is absolutely the governance body for the pension fund, in association partly with the county council itself. The question is, you know, who makes the decisions that could bind that particular organisation? The pension board can't bind the county council or the pension fund to anything, whether it's contractually. It can guide and assist and make recommendations. It can certainly rattle our cage, so I'm not denying that it doesn't have cage rattling powers, but it certainly is not the governing body that sits with a pension fund committee.
That doesn't really answer my question. The question was more around whether or not we feel that the comments made there, so internal audit provide assurance annually around fund governance and management. And LPPA also undertake their internal audit with ad hoc oversight from an external auditor. Is that highlighted in yellow because there is a feeling that that isn't sufficient for whatever the body is? And I still think it's unclear in terms of where that responsibility sits. But regardless of that, wherever the responsibility sits, that if somebody came out from the pension regulator and audited us, would they conclude, based on that assurance, that there are effective governance arrangements in place, yes or no?
Look, I think you wanted to comment on that.
Well, sorry, Carl, I'm probably going to go back and we might have to say the question again, but I was going to refer to the use of the word board, because I think it may be an issue of semantics, because the TPR in their documentation uses board.
Yeah.
Now, in all other funds, whether the private sector funds or whatever, they will have board of trustees. So hence you get the kind of confusion that it may be board for the LGPS. It clearly isn't board. It is a pension fund committee that has the authority for decision making.
I think that's exactly right. The pension regulator got confused, but they used the word board very loosely, which didn't work for the LGPS in Code of Practice 14. And they're trying to put that right this time, because a lot of people put a lot of pressure on them to try and put it right. I mean, Carl, going back to your question, your substantive question, I suggest we take this under item 16 when we have Rachel Ellsworth here.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's not really highlighted for any particular reason. I think that was just a drafting issue, so don't read too much into that. But we have noted that we need to review that module with internal audit, and because we've got a few actions that depend on other parties like LPPA, internal audit, finance, and so we'll be doing more work on that. But there's nothing to concern us there.
Well, I've said it before, and I'll place it on record again. I'm not comfortable that we haven't had an independent review of our governance arrangements, and I think that this is an issue. So that's my position. Obviously, I'm a single member of the board, but that is my position.
Okay, Carl, is the discomfort with the Lancashire County Pension Fund governance arrangements or the LPPA governance arrangements?
It's everything. It's all of the arrangements that allow us to gain the level of assurance that we need, that governance of the whole scheme, including the LPPL, APPA, LPPI, the internal audit function, how that's undertaken, how that's carried out. There ought to be an independent review of governance arrangements generally across the whole thing, and that hasn't been undertaken. I know why we're in the position we're in, because of the pooling arrangements that were forced upon us in 2015. But I still believe that there should be an independent review of those governance arrangements.
Okay, yeah, Sean.
Yeah, I was just going to make 2 points. We've talked before about this AAF standard that LPPA are working towards, and that is independent. It's used by a variety of organisations, and that's the goal that we're working towards. So that will help us get to that point. And also, we are undertaking this single code of practice review, and there is a good governance project in transit as well across the sector, which will mean that we'll be focusing more on governance as well over the forthcoming period.
Okay, can we just note Carl's point? I mean, this item is actually about single code of practice, and I do think part of what you're talking about will be covered under item 16, the LPPA side. But I think we also note the comment that you are uncomfortable with the governance at the moment.
Can we just, Jeanette's been frantically looking for something with the good governance guidance, but under the recommendation of the good governance guidance, there is a requirement to have a biannual independent.
That may get dropped, is my information.
Possible.
Yeah. There's a one bit for good governance which may not make it through to the final thing. Any other questions about the single code of practice? Yeah, sorry, Deborah.
Yeah, just on ADM OOH, that the monthly contribution, it makes reference to equity and obviously there's big changes happening in terms of the computer system. So would that just be going to actual exercise split around the new system. Is that correct?
Sorry.
On the ADA WOH, about managing contributions. There's reference to that Norwich call.
Should we pick that up under the risk register?
Is
The
that
reason,
okay with
yeah,
you?
the reason that I say that is that that's one of the issues that's being looked at on the risk register at the moment. It's related to
Great,
that.
thank you. And then the other query again, and I think it's probably we'll get it again later under communications, is that I think that there are issues about communications being inclusive. But again, it's more of a communications issue than it's in the current practice. But the document was incredibly helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for presenting. I think it's been a very helpful conversation. Any other comments before we close this item? No, okay, right, thank you very much. Item 9 is a communications update, which we are asked to note and comment on the content of the communication strategy. It's obviously very important. A, because it's something we've been talking about here for the last year or two, and something we need to pay attention on, but also because we've got pace in the transition to the new administration system, and of course valuation. So this is a substantive item which we should spend some time on. Mukta, I think you're leading on this, aren't you? Am I right?
I'll also kind of defer to Janelle for the comm strategy, but just to kind of kick things off really. This is our comms update. We get the report from Llpb, Chris Dawson, the head of communications and engagement, to produce their report. The key kind of things for them is the pace rollout at the moment and the employee training they're doing around UPM, and the fact that we'll be going live on the 31st of October. There's a couple of things that we picked up around the employee engagement, but the more substantive part of the main paper is the communication strategy, which we've been working on. I think we've already mentioned a couple of things already. I'm just going to hand over to Janelle to pick up a few things on that.
So just to give you an update as to where we've progressed to on the communication strategy. So we've started the planning around developing a strategy, and we've identified some initial objectives, which are to identify the communication engagement needs of the fund membership and implement appropriate methods of communication by the fund and provide recommendations to our DPA. Increase member satisfaction regarding the engagement offered by the fund and local pension partnership administration, and enhance and improve the fund engagement with its membership, which complements the service offered by MPPA at the moment. We are looking to consult with the local pension board at key points in the process. And well, this is so we can see the board's thoughts and views and allow them to provide oversight of the development of the strategy. We will fully work out when that will be as we plan the project. We have identified a few quick wins which the fund are looking at delivering, and we have already put one of them in place. So we've updated our website with valuation content, and we've shared and we've sent an email to the employers to inform them of where that content is. I'm going to consult with our internal communication teams at Lancashire County Council to understand what support they may be able to offer, and if they've got any best practice for engaging with our membership, to obviously obtain an insight as to what our membership would like to see from the fund. We are looking to provide employers with content to share with their employees, which covers key roles and responsibilities of the fund, local pensions partnership, and the employer themselves. There is a restriction on this, which we are in conversation with Llpb around the timing due to project pace, because if we do deliver this, it will direct some traffic towards Llpb. And it will have an impact on their SLAs. So in addition to the timing, we also need to be wary that if we do publish this content with our employers, it's going to drive a lot of people towards member self-service, and we don't want members to have to register on member self-service, and then when they deliver pay the pension point, have to re-register again. So we just need to find the optimum time, but we are discussing with that. In terms of the project itself, we can break it down into 3 categories. So we've got the stakeholder engagement, where we want to engage with key stakeholders to ensure sufficient specialist input into the development of the strategy plan and member survey. And then we'll have the member survey part, which will be consultation with the members to identify communication priorities, and then that'll hopefully develop into a member needs report, which will be production of a report to understand the communication needs of our membership, which will then be discussed with the pension committee and the local pension board. So that's the update on the com strategy where we're at so far. So if anybody's got any questions.
Goodbye. Thank you very much indeed. I'll start with Deborah and then go to Carl.
But thank you for the update, and again, really helpful and comprehensive. And most of the sort of my questions and comments really link into LPPA and what we can recommend or require of them. So really, is this going to be an opportunity to inform the revised service agreement with LPPA? So obviously we're going to invest considerably in terms of getting member, well, all stakeholder views. So rather than us have to almost pay twice, if it was part of what we could require of LPPA, but then of course it would have to be included in the revision of the agreement.
Yeah, and I think we need to think about what are we looking at? Are we looking at communications that LPPA should be undertaken with members, or are there other communications that we'd want to undertake at a fund level? So I think there's a bit of a balance there to think about. And we've also been a bit honest about the constraints that we might have. So, you know, perhaps in an ideal world would have some fund branded communication going via LPPA, but that would obviously have cost implications, and we'll need to give that some more thought as to whether LPPA could do that itself. So there's a few questions there that we'll need to consider, but at this stage we wanted to focus on getting a proper understanding of what members actually want, because we need to hear it straight from their mouths, if you like.
Thank you.
Carl. Carl, did you have a kind of deep to that?
Yeah, I like the strategy. I like the direction of travel, you know, and the appreciation of the risks in terms of the implementation of PACE, and I particularly like the report itself, which isn't obviously the strategy, but the LPPA Engagement, Marketing and Communications Team report. You know, I think that really ticked all of the boxes for me in terms of setting out the activity that had been undertaken in quite a lot of specific detail over the last 3 months, and then the planned actions going forward with lots of links to various areas should the reader want to delve further. So I thought that was a really helpful update, actually, and I think they're heading in the right direction. I've got no major concerns about it.
Okay, well, thank you. Does anybody else wish to make any comments about it? Yeah, Kevin.
Sorry, just a comment top of page 54 there about the member survey. I mean, obviously, I've gone to do that's very important.
Yes.
Could you tell us anything more about the intended scale of the event? And what sort of detail you'd be going into?
So, initial thoughts in terms of who we're going to reach out to. What we're going to try to reach out to all the members that are registered with our online system. So we try and do it electronically, and at the moment that is around 70,000 members.
With what percentage?
That is about 40% of our membership. Yeah. Now another fund has done something similar, where they got a 10% response rate. So if we get 10% response rate, I think that's pretty good.
Yeah, on the 10% response rate, I've never heard of a 10% response rate. If we got 5, I'd be really pleased.
Absolutely, yeah. So obviously, we're still thinking about the type of things that is going to go into that particular survey.
Yeah, I suppose that's where maybe the board can be helpful in kind of steering us in terms of asking the right questions. If there's things that are important to yourself as members. But yes, it's short and snappy, not too many questions, but hitting the key marks. That's the
Look, Tom, would it be helpful if we kind of gave you a couple of members as an informal sounding board? So that rather than having to wait for these meetings, you could actually email them.
I know Janelle was keen on trying to get somebody.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose we don't want to have like a formal working group, but if we could have a sounding board, it would be really good.
Well, I'm going to look at Glyn, actually, I'm afraid, but we'll do this maybe out of the meeting, but I tell you, because of your expertise in IT, etc., you might be helpful on that.
I'm very happy helping, Chair. There is a danger when you talk to one subset of your members, and we're talking to the digitally included, that you kind of compound that problem a bit, and you ask them questions, and then you get a bit of a false view. But it's something our members constantly keep me on my toes about, digital inclusion of our citizens and residents. So there's no quick answer to that, but I'm happy to have it.
Right. Well, thank you very much indeed. And I'm quite tempted to volunteer Yvonne in her absence. I will check with her by email before confirming that, but possibly if Lynn, and Yvonne were to take that role.
Sure.
Thank you. A very small question I had is from, again, with my LPFA hat experience on, who moved to PACE in February, March. One of the big questions was, well, one of the complaints was that there was no employer helpline. Employers woke up day one and couldn't make it work. They had to wait for the kind of main helpline. And it's a question we might ask Rachel later on today, but it's something which I think could be helpful. Yeah, sorry, Deborah.
Are we looking at the administration updates as well?
No, this is purely about communications. It's just that
Yeah, just on the communications policy then, will the revision of that happen after the strategy work has been completed?
I think it would make sense to do it in that order, because the policy gets into more granular detail. Although you could argue that they're not, there's only a bit of overlap between the two. It's not like they're both the same.
But when I looked at the policy, there was so much that was subject to change now with the changes that are in the pipeline, that it would just be, for me, to make sense that it was delayed until maybe November this year rather than the date that it's down.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah, Glyn.
I'm just thinking about your last point about an employer helpline. I guess as part of the PACE Go Live, the employer will be signing this off, and there will be some kind of hypercare period put in place to support the employer. Am I assuming here?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure that has happened in the past, and I think we should talk about it with Rachel.
Okay.
Get her perspective.
Yeah, they do have a hypercare period of about a month or 2 months.
That will be enough.
Which is the norm, isn't it?
Okay. Any other comments? Right. We're asked to note and comment on the strategy. I think we're happy we've done that. Okay. Right, thank you very much. Item 10, feedback on pension-related training. I've got some comments I want to make about the PNSA conference, but let me go around the room first. Kevin?
Yes, thanks. The overview of the LGPS was a webinar, so it was all online. It's run by Barnett Waddingham, one-man outfit. It was a really comprehensive refresher course. And I'll jump to what I was going to say at the end. I'd recommend it for every new member of the board. It's a really good, insightful course. I won't go through all the agenda because it's all there online, but various snippets I picked up during a mixture of formal and informal chat in no particular order. Mention was made of McLeod.
Sure.
And funny enough, there was a strong opinion that actually it won't have a huge effect, but it will take a lot of work to get done. That seems to be the picture there. Another interesting one to me is that the Scheme Advisory Board is unique in that it can give advice to the Secretary of State without being asked. Who knows what the answer might be? And another interesting one, the biggest area of complaints handled by the pensions ombudsman is to do with ill health retirement. Well, that's cropped up here before.
Yes,
So
yeah.
that seems to be a national picture there. And LGPS UK has assets of 340 billion, which makes it, if it were a single unit, God forbid it ever becomes one, that would make it the 5th biggest fund in the world. But don't tell the government.
Kevin, the government thinks it's the 8th biggest. I've heard them say that.
Mention 2 was made that we've already covered this, but consultation on the code practice. And they said to shrink 15 codes into one. I think our paperwork said 10, but anyway. And it was suggested this would kick in about spring of next year, which is a bit later than people picking up. Also an interesting comment about universities. Due to change from being scheduled bodies to designated bodies. So they can choose to join other schemes outside the LGPS. It wasn't discussed, it was just reported that. So I'm not sure how accurate that is.
Yeah, it wasn't too formal then.
No. Oh, and LGPS UK, with its assets, pays out about £9 billion per annum in pension. That gives you an idea of the scale. And an interesting comment about the valuations. There's thinking that it could move to over 4 years rather than 3. If the actually gets its way. So, and of course, mention was made again of inflation, which is a matter of concern. But of course, in the longer term,
Apologies. You've made somebody happy.
response there. The thing about inflation, I can give you a sporting analogy to that. In that must get this the right way around. Class is permanent, but form is temporary. So inflation is a poor form of that, but I'm sure it'll get back to normal eventually. I didn't mention Everton once. But no, just to say, Barnet Wadding are a decent outfit. They run good courses, very tightly scheduled, very useful, good use of time. I'd certainly recommend it to newcomers. Yeah.
Good, Mike, are you okay on that? The next kind of trainings on the list here is the legal update. I'm actually going to turn to Sean to just update it. It wasn't entirely satisfactory, I think it's the best way I can put it.
Yeah, I think if I was to summarise it, there was some content in there that was incorrect, or maybe a misinterpretation or a liberal interpretation of what the rest of the sector would think. So we didn't put the recording up on the website because we didn't want it to potentially be misunderstood or misconstrued by users. And we did look into getting a note produced, perhaps by the person who delivered the training or an alternative legal firm. But when I looked at the notes, I think it would have been quite difficult to just put them up on the website and then you have to work through them yourselves. So the plan is to incorporate some legal update training at an appropriate point in the future. And of course, in the meantime, all of the papers are reviewed by legal before they go out. If there's anything that requires specialist legal knowledge, we can use the legal firms that we use. So that should be reassuring for you in the interim.
Okay, and finally, I attended the PNSA conference a couple of weeks ago. This is the really kind of the biggest conference where you get a lot of people there. The minister comes down and talks. So, and the subject this year was actually about impact, obviously joining up with the government's levelling up agenda. I'm not going to go through everything now because there were hundreds of different sessions, but the ones I found interesting were there was a big session on pension scams, and particularly the item we've just touched on, transfers in and out of DB, because the government and the pension regulator are going to take that quite seriously. So that's why I think it would be good to get training on that at some point. Secondly, the pensions dashboard is coming quite down the road quite quickly, and the LGPS, I think it's April 24, where we're going to be expected to be able to take in a request. Does a deferred member have a pension here? And the volume will be considerable because every time somebody makes a request, it will go out to every single pension fund who he could possibly have been a member of. So I think there's some work to be done there possibly. The session I found most interesting was very poorly advertised. It was a session on class actions, where in fact Norfolk County Council, Norfolk Pension Fund, had led an action against an American biotech health company, which had clearly misled them and other investors and won it. It was just talking about there was a lawyer on the panel, and Alex Younger from Norfolk was on the panel. And it was a very interesting session because the lawyer reckons that this was going to come to the UK. There were going to be more class actions. The rules are different here, but it was likely that pension funds, like big pension funds in particular, like Lancashire, might find themselves in a position where they were, as having to leave or choosing to lead these actions.
Yeah. We can pick that up with LPPI.
Yeah.
And get an update on what they're up to in that area.
And then finally, Theresa Fay spoke from DLUC, and she talked about pooling. She made it quite clear that she wanted the scale to be much bigger. She mentioned a figure of 40 to 50 billion, which if you do the maths is a bit difficult with 8 pools and 340 billion pounds. She wanted it to be faster. We know that. She may or may not get it. I think the most important thing is there is going to be a huge consultation this autumn. DLUC are going to throw everything together, and it's going to be a most horrendous affair, which we will have to go through and respond to. But all the various things which have been bubbling under the surface, good governance, cooling, climate change, etc., is going to come up in one big lump. That's what I wanted to say about the PLSA. Did anybody else attend any other training which they'd like to talk about?
I'd like to say how helpful the case update
Yes.
was, and it was very insightful. And just with reference to the legal training, I was very pleased that you were there and raised one specific question, William, with some of the misinformation. For me, it just felt like there was a lack of understanding of the personality of the culture between pension board and committee.
Yeah, well, thank you.
If I could just say, I would agree with Kevin. I think Barnett Waddington was an excellent presentation. They covered a breadth of the pension fund issues that I've not seen before. I think it's well worth looking at that again. I thought the legal. I don't think we'll be using that individual again. Will be my bottom line.
Thank you very much. And I think we should maybe just, if you could note, Barnett, the fact that Barnett Waddington's presentation was good for induction training for next year. Mike, you wanted to add something?
Yes, just very quickly, with regard to the 29th of June workshop, Project Pace and pension admin update, just really to confirm that that was attended by Lynn, Yvonne, Catherine, Deborah and Kevin. So that the training record for those board members will be updated. So that'll play into the figures down the line.
Good. Anything else on training? Yes, Steve.
Just saying, actually speaking at the conference next week on compliance, governance and risk. And what does good governance look like? So I'm sure the local pension board can get a mention.
Okay, right, thank you very much.
Of course.
We'll be seeing the slides.
Should be there. Right, thank you. Okay, item 11 then is part 1 reports at the 17th of June Pension Fund Committee.
Yep. So I've just highlighted a couple of things to pick up on. There were a few reports that will feed into the annual report that will finish off in the autumn. And the governance compliance statement was approved, as was the local pension board annual report, as I mentioned before. We also looked at the external audit and had a presentation from the auditor there. That was a useful update. There was some scrutiny around the fees that are charged. So we discussed that as well as materiality, because there is the concept of materiality, and because we're such a big fund, the materiality level can be low in terms of percentage, but in terms of absolute value, it can be sizable. So we've taken away an option to look at that. The risk management framework went through fine. You'll have seen that in back in April. And they were the main things I was going to pick up on, but if there's any questions or comments, I can take them.
Good. Let me throw it open to anybody who'd like to comment or ask questions about any of the pension fund reports, pension fund committee part 1 reports. Yeah, Steve.
Responsible investment. I approached by our portfolio holder for climate change and why we invest in fossil fuels. So I signposted to this report. It does seem to grow each time, but it's very informative and does explain what is going on, the influence of the pension fund on individual companies, not just around fossil fuels, but gender balance on boards, etc. Yeah, it's really illuminating.
Yeah, good. Yeah, Deborah.
Yeah, I do think comes back with the responsible investment report. I do think we've got now a whole series of reports that meet individuals' needs, either if it's the type of person that prefers the dashboard and the supporting information. But I would really strongly advise people to read the full the Rebecca report as well. Yes, we've now got a summary in this document, which in itself is helpful, but that document is just so insightful and just provide quite a lot of assurance of what's happening in the global field. And I know that we are invited to suggest more areas for the dashboard, but again, I'm just slightly concerned that we end up with too much in dashboard form, although the new additions I think are very, very appropriate, very insightful.
Good, thank you. Any other, Carl, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I was just wanted to touch on the paragraph 5 of the report on internal assurance for the pension fund committee. So that talks about the overpayments and the controls in place around overpayments, which don't appear to be effective. So reference is made to a significant balance on the overpayments balance sheet control account, partially due to overpayments being made per se, but also due to a lack of monthly reconciliations. That just doesn't sit comfortably with me, and I think to just accept this has already been identified as an issue and actions to address this have commenced isn't sufficient. I think there should be some kind of follow-up of that.
Can you give us a reference, please, on the pension fund committee reports?
There is 3.5 of the, if I just...
So it was the internal audit report.
Of the internal audit report in Appendix A.
Right, so can you give me a page number, perhaps, on the PDF?
So within Appendix A, which is the additional document attached to the internal audit report, if you go into that,
53, right?
then that document doesn't have page numbers, but it does have paragraph references, and it's paragraph reference 3.5.
Okay, 3.5. Right, down there, yeah, down there. Okay, sure.
So what we've done to action this, we've developed a debt management strategy policy, which we've started to implement. And the idea is that we'll have better controls and processes going forwards. And when I say going forwards, we've already started to implement it. It was last autumn that we brought it to the committee for sign-off. And then there is a historic level of debts that we're working through as well. I think we've covered off about 50% of that so far. Julie's been working on that predominantly with help from Jenny. And what we agreed at the committee was that we'll provide an update on this because it is an important area to look at, and we're partway through the rectification of it. So that it's an appropriate point for us to explain what we've implemented and how it's progressing, so that we can help rectify those points or address those points that you just raised.
Okay, well, this isn't an area of strategic emphasis. It's an operational matter. I don't think everything needs a strategy supporting it. What it does need is an operational update on what is happening and a clear, each time it goes to the pension fund committee, a clear assurance of progress being made so that this issue is no longer an issue when that area gets audited again next year. And it should definitely be part of the internal audit strategy for our internal audit team when that does when that is undertaken, so that we can get independent assurance that what you're telling us has actually happened on the ground. But I'm comfortable if that report is going to the pension fund committee to rely on the pension fund committee in holding the fund accountable for this particular area of weakness.
Just to say that the policy does cover operations as well. So we've defined what the operational process would look like. And the audit team, as a matter of course, do follow-ups on the audits that they undertake. So they will have a time allotted to actually checking that this has been implemented, these actions have been implemented.
Okay, so when the weakness was actually raised, did you, as a management comment, provide an implementation date when that would be, when that weakness would be addressed?
Yes, we would have, and we brought the matter to the pension fund committee last September when we agreed what actions we were going to undertake. So there was quite a comprehensive paper that went to the pension fund committee, and we had a good discussion about it. And you know, they've been overseeing this.
Yeah, if it hasn't already been identified as an area that I guess I accept as follow-up, and if the follow-up addresses the issue in its entirety, that's absolutely fine. If it doesn't, this is an area that will need to be on the audit in future internal audit work in order to ensure that it's appropriately dealt with going forward. But you know, I'll take assurance from the fact that the progress has been made and that it's on the pension fund committee's radar. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Carl. Eddie.
Carl, I'd say this is very much on the pension committee's radar. It was raised by a number of members during the meeting and outside of the meeting to me. I think the figures that were mentioned in the meeting were actually very overstated. There is an outstanding figure, but it's not a material figure.
Okay.
And so the report will be coming back to the September pension fund committee, and it should answer hopefully the queries that you've raised.
Thanks, Eddie. Thanks, Eddie. I obviously just see the word significant, and obviously you can read into that. Yeah.
Can I make a couple of points? So one is, it's really almost a law of anybody, which is this is that over the last few years, I've kind of a number of times suggested that maybe it'd be a good idea to ask for the local pension board to get some input into the scope of Lancashire's internal audit, because I think Pete, Carl, and other employer reps are kind of at the other end of it. They kind of see where there might be weaknesses. And this, yeah, sort of respond to that. I'm going to make my second point.
Well, I was just going to say that we do have a fairly recently joined head of audit. So it might be a good time to reach out to the new head of audit and introduce him to the pension board. Yeah. And I'm sure he would be happy to take on board, you know, the work of this board and incorporate as necessary into the work that it does. I mean, how far he becomes involved in pension fund issues is a separate question. But I'll certainly pick up the phone and have a word with him.
Okay, thank you. And the second point I'd just like to make is that I think, if I've got it right, I may not have, under item 16, we are going to be looking at how LPPA are providing assurance in their control framework. And I think one of the questions we have there, which I won't go into in depth now, is exactly what they are doing and how that relates to the conversation we had last year about providing interim assurance and then long-term assurance. But I suggest we do that under item 16 and not now. Anything else on item 11? No? Okay, thank you. Right. It's got on to urgent business. I haven't been told of any. Does anybody have anything they wish to raise now? No? Okay. Item 13, the date of this next meeting is the 18th of October at 2 o'clock. I think at this point we're kind of where we ask whether we're going to have, whether we wish to exclude the press and public. Just say I will have a comfort break anyway, just to allow Mike to turn that off, Mike to turn off the live stream once we've excluded the press and public. So item 14, do we wish to exclude the public on the grounds that under section 100A(4) of the Local Government Act 1972, we are considering items of business where there might be disclosure of exempt information as defined in part 1 of 12A of the LGA 1972. Are we